Whether you're new to Valorant or you're experienced, these 3 must-know rules are going to be pivotal to your long-term success. So, all that being said, let's get started. The most critical component to your long-term success as a player is to gather as much information as you possibly can as early as you can. And that's because players tend to have tendencies. And it isn't all about just the enemy's composition, it is all about the micro and the macro decisions that they make along the way. So what I typically like to do is I like to make reads based off of what players do in the first 3 rounds. And the reason why the first 3 rounds are so impactful is because it gives you the necessary information as to what enemies like to buy, why they're buying it, and also, more importantly, their positioning and why they decide to choose that position as they move forward. So in this example here on screen, I was able to adjust and make necessary decisions based off of sound cues, but also the fact that the enemy had a habit of always trying to rush B with at least 4 people with 1 person going mid. So what I did with Deadlock is Deadlock through her grav net, and the moment I heard the sound go off that they were taking off the grav net, I immediately flashed in and I was able to cook 3 out of the 4 enemies there.
No escape. Watch your eyes. Spike down B.
Sanjugo Jetto. That's impact. And that was just off of a simple sound cue that you can take full advantage of. And that was information. So it's not just about the, again, composition of the enemy, but taking cues off of what utility is used, why it's being used, and how you can capitalize is what's going to lead you to long-term success. You have to always be paying attention and making the necessary adjustments every step of the way. So I want to say this again, that the first few rounds, at least the first 1 to 3 rounds, that's the time for you to start adapting, getting necessary information. Rounds 4 to 8 is where you can really start to apply the necessary strategies to ensure that the enemy does not counterplay you. And then as you get close to the end of the game, rounds 9 to 12, that's when you can start to really apply pressure, psychological pressure in terms of counterplay, because by that time, you should have enough information gathered to make the necessary decisions and make sure your team ensures the victory. So, to reiterate, information is really important. You want to make sure that not only are you looking at the enemy composition, but you're looking at player tendencies, you're looking at what they're buying per round, understanding that each round is information that you need to gather slowly. Everything is micro and macro, and you need to use those to properly position yourself and your team to get the victory. So, that being said, let's move on. Across all levels in Valorant, this particular point is oftentimes overlooked, and as a result, most teams tend to lose rounds and at worst, lose games because of inconsistency, and that is following checkpoints. So what are checkpoints? Well, in video game terms, a checkpoint is really a confirmation by the game, letting you, the player, know that you've reached a certain goal in a game, and once you've reached that goal, you can then proceed on to the next goal. And so this principle can be applied to Valorant in the same way, but in a more strategic manner. So let's take a look at Sunset, for example. If you are trying to execute B with your team, it's important that we check off these checkpoints step by step. First, you check off B main. That's your first checkpoint, making sure the enemies are not there lingering. And then you want to execute the site. That's your second checkpoint. Your third checkpoint can be market, checking market. And then your last checkpoint can be checking boba. These are imperative because without proper planning and execution, you'll oftentimes run into risks that are really just blind tactics, and ultimately you push your team into uncharted territory without initiating a strategic and formulaic approach to consistently applying pressure for victory. Every checkpoint is necessary, so that way you as the team leader or just a team in general can apply the necessary strategies and routines to make sure that A, utility is not wasted, and 2, you're not giving up valuable resources like your guns or just overall giving up your life. So you need to always consider that every checkpoint in Valorant is imperative. There's always something that you have to execute or solve before you move on to the next problem. Otherwise, if you don't, you're going to end up in situations where you're just making the same consistent mistakes because you haven't planned enough carefully to ensure that the execute is well oiled and maintained. So, to reiterate, make sure that you are executing with a proper game plan, checking off every list of the checkpoint to ensure that your team can make necessary pushes and get the victory as needed. So let's move on. This last point I honestly can't stress enough, but that is to be a team player. Valorant at its core is all about teamwork, and if you're able to cooperate with your team, regardless of the outcome, you have already won in the grand scheme of things. And that's because your attitude is what determines your altitude. If you continue to bring a light to the team and you encourage your team in spite of what's happening, your team can transform in the blink of an eye. I've had moments where a teammate on my team would be acting inappropriately, or perhaps they were just trolling or they weren't performing as well. But because of my willingness to provide that positive reinforcement, they suddenly shifted their mindset and ultimately popped off for us to win the game. You just never know what someone's going through behind the scenes, and you, as another human being, have to recognize that. At the end of the day, none of us are perfect, and so it's important to be a beacon of light for others and to be that consistent team player, more so than just your aim or positioning or any of these other things that many creators tell you to focus on. Your attitude, your mentality is what really determines your growth long term in Valorant, and your willingness to be a team player, be a leader, and really enforce a positive re-encouragement despite what your teammates are going through. Always try to have the right attitude. If it's going out of control, well, you can always mute the teammate if need be, but do your best to always try to make an impact in a positive way. That way the rest of your team can follow through and do the same thing, because positivity begets more positivity and more negativity begets more negativity. So try to be more positive, be that team leader, and make sure that your team is making the necessary executes to first A, gather information, 2, ensure checkpoints are cleared, and lastly, being that team player to make sure everyone is on the same common goal, aiming for victory. So that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video and that these necessary tools will help you to shift and dominate your game in Valorant. As always, new warriors, stay strong, keep fighting, and may the force be with you all, always. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more. Take care. Peace.